Ooh, my internet's weak, guys.
All right, you guys are live. Have a great broadcast.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to our community engagement on the proposed agreement with Terracott Communities in Toronto. This engagement is brought to you by the Consultation and Accommodation Process team, who work out of Elected Council's Land and Resources Department. We're going to introduce members of the team, outline the agenda, and then get started. For introductions, we'll start with Lonnie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lonnie Bomberry. I'm the Director of the Land Resource Department for Six Nations Council.
Phil?
Gregor, I'm Phil Montour. I've worked on our land rights since about 1974, and as a member of the CAP team, they bring me in on. Thank you.
Tanya?
Sego Guego. I'm Tanya Hill Montour, the archaeology supervisor for Six Nations of the Grand River, and nice to join everyone today.
Lauren J?
Good afternoon, Lauren Jones. I am the manager of the Six Nations Wildlife and Stewardship Office.
Galen?
Good afternoon. My name is Dalen G. I'm a land use technician here at Lands and Resources.
Lauren V?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Vanderlingen, and I am the technician at the Wildlife and Stewardship Office.
Tierra?
Scano Sowego. I am Tierra Henhot. I am the archaeology supervisor assistant of Six Nations of the Grand River.
We also have with us Dawn Russell, our consultation administrative assistant. I believe she's on one-way audio taking notes.
Good afternoon, I'm Taylor Hill. I'm Assistant Director at Lands and Resources for Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council.
I'm Peter Graham, Consultation Supervisor for Elected Council. So our agenda today is that we'll start with Phil explaining the Nanfan Treaty. Then Dalen will give a brief outline of the project. A group of us will be answering questions that we've previously received from community members, because we believe others might be asking those same questions. And then after that, we're gonna open up the room for questions via the chat function. So as I believe you're all aware, Terracott Communities, a development company, is planning on building condominiums on the north portion of the Flemington Golf Club in Toronto. Terracott first got in touch with us over 2 years ago. We started meeting in the summer of 2022. They wanted our involvement, we believe, just to help facilitate their development application. There's a lot of opposition from golfers who want the course to be maintained as is. And we were supportive of their vision to renaturalize that property. It intrinsically has positive environmental gain. But we weren't willing to endorse that aspect without something tangible for the Six Nations community. As a result, we negotiated with the developer for a benefit, which resulted in the proposed cultural center that Dalen and others will comment on later. In the late spring, early summer of this year, Terracott's application for the project in Toronto was denied. And as a result, there will be Ontario Land Tribunal meeting to hear the appeal for the project in February. And so the nub of it is in exchange for supporting the proposed development, that Six Nations will have a deep collaborative role in designing the rewilding of the property, that there will be, acknowledgement of Six Nations, we believe, in that parkland, but also that larger, more tangible piece, the cultural center. And with that, I'll turn things over to Phil to discuss the Nanfan Treaty, because that is the treaty lands this proposal is on.
Okay, yes, thank you. Where this piece of land is located, it's in, as Peter pointed out, it's in the Toronto area. It is not part of the Haldimand Tract, the Haldimand Treaty lands, which is very active before the courts right now, and that's a different issue. But under the 1701 treaty, we still have the legal obligation to consult and, where appropriate, accommodate with the Six Nations of the Grand River. Well, and that treaty really was secure in following the peace treaty. It's entered into the Five Nations with the other Indigenous nations. But that was in 1701. Following that, the Five Nations, although there was peace among the Indigenous tribes, we still despise the treachery of the French. And we agreed, the Five Nations agreed to place the lands they had conquered from the Hurons and the other Indigenous nations under the protection of the king. In other words, to let him place his castles upon our lands, which basically is his forts. And that was, the intent was really to stop and protect our lands from further invasion by the French. In fact, we held the king's feet to the fire on that, and to honor this treaty, and we made him remove forts from Detroit, the French forts from Detroit, the French forts from Niagara, and the French forts from Frontenac, which is up in the Kingston. So the Crowns honored this treaty. It was also acknowledged in the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 that Article 15 says that the Five Nations would not specifically not be molested, and we could continue our trade and continue our business throughout the Great Lakes, between the Great Lakes. So it's a living treaty. It's not like a meets and bounds ownership one, but it's a treaty that the Six Nations, we maintain an interest in. So it's that interest is why there's a duty to consult, and it should be on pretty well all developments in the city of Toronto. Unfortunately, we have New Credit, and they've basically have surrendered all of their interest in it, but they have never, the Five Nations, the Six Nations of the Grand River, our interests, underlying interests, have never been extinguished, unlike New Credit's. So there is this obligation, but what has happened, we ourselves have got a lot of educating the non-natives people, in fact, in the Toronto area, is that there is this legal obligation to be dealing with us and consult with us. So that is the principle of it, but it's going to be a key opportunity for educate the general population in the Toronto area that our rights are here, we are still here, and we do have protections, and we got to say in how we protect these lands and to be accommodated accordingly. So that's a really quick. The history lesson related to this treaty also deals with the wars and the peace treaty of Montreal and so on. But that's the genesis of the Fort Albany Nanfan Treaty as it's expressed. Thank you. Now I don't know if I've frozen. Or is Peter frozen? Lauren, did you hear what I had said by chance?
I
Okay,
heard.
We all heard you.
so I'm not frozen. Somebody's frozen.
No, somebody's frozen. We lost a bunch of people.
Okay.
Actually, we lost everyone's in the office. Are we
Oh,
still alive, Daryl?
Yes, we are. We're still alive.
Okay, so, my apologies to our viewers. We lost the bulk of the team here, I guess.
So maybe not to lose ground, we could talk about the environment with, oh,
There
okay,
we go. They're all back.
they're coming back.
Yeah, sorry about that. We lost our network here at the office for a few minutes there. I'm just gonna pull my screen back up now.
And just while Dalen does that, one thing I neglected to mention with the agenda is that after Dalen walks you through the basics of the project, the next item is that Lauren Jones will just note some basic environmental facts about the property.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, again, sorry about that. So here's kind of a high-level overview of the project here. If you look here, if you see my mouse here on the right side of the screen, the actual project proposal is 4 high-rise buildings, which is to be built on 5% of the total property. And the rest of the property will be given back to the city it'll become a restoration land. It'll be public space, but they're going to only develop this part of the land, and the rest of this whole green area here is going to be turned into a natural area again. And Six Nations, us, what we would get out of this is we will get a cultural center located within one of these buildings here that we will be able to run and operate for 36 months, so 3 years without any cost to us. And then after that, it's kind of up to us what we want to do with the condo. If we want to keep it, keep running it, we could sell it. Or we could also settle for a one-time payment of $1 million. And what we have to do is we have to support the project at the Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. So here's a picture of the site today. So currently it is, as Peter mentioned, it is Fleming Don Golf Course. So really there's not much of ecological value to the property currently. And I think that there might be some misconceptions about golf courses. A lot of people think that golf courses are, there is nature and that they're really good for the environment, but that's not really the case. If you think about it, golf course, every single day the grass needs to be cut. Fairways, greens, rough. So that's greenhouse gases that are getting emitted from these lawnmowers. Not to mention the chemicals and the fertilizers that are used on a daily basis to keep the grass growing, keep it healthy, make it look green. So people are going to want to play there. So that degrades the soil. And then also irrigation runs throughout the whole course. So they have a diesel pump that'll be taking water out of the river right there. That'll be used to water the course. So that also has negative effects on the environment. So at the end of the day, if this place were to get renaturalized, it's going to be better than it currently is today. So here's just some metrics about the development. So here's another rendering. If you follow my mouse here, you can see the proposal here. So the exact heights they're not set in stone yet because the development hasn't been approved. So there could be some minor fluctuations, but as of right now, they're proposing the units the towers to be with 42 to 56 stories. Which will bring a total of about 2,000 units. Like I said, that could change. And then here's just the gross floor area is about 130,000 square meters. And here's some other metrics about parking and stuff, but they won't be too relevant to us. Here's a rendering of what the potential buildings could look like. Brian Porter at Tuo Architect. He has partnered up with these guys. So there's a little bit of a Haudenosaunee flavor in some of the designs of these buildings. And here is a little more about the cultural programming space. So the top of the screen here this is the 4 towers. The cultural space is programmed to be on the most easterly part of the towers because it's kind of in the valley. So it's kind of on a high spot. So that would be a great spot to watch the sunrise out of the east there. So this cultural center is going to be a minimum of 3,500 feet. It's going to have office spaces for us to use. It's going to have a full kitchen. It's going to be the same finishes as the rest of the units within the condos. And like I mentioned before, it's going to be expense free for us for 36 months. So there's lots of opportunities for us to do lots of different things with this center. And yeah, here's just a little bit of a high level of what potential restoration could be happening on the property. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauren. She's going to get more into the details here of the environment that's currently there.
Lovely, thank you. Hi, so Lauren Jones. There was quite a few of environmental documents associated with this project. So I tried to break up the summary of all of them based on the report. So I hope that makes sense, but if not, and if there is any questions, just a reminder to do a comment or contact the office directly. Okay, so first off, we have this map here. It's very similar to the map that Dalen was saying prior. Just trying to give you an idea of the perimeter of the study area, so where they actually looked at the natural environment. And the orange bit is actually where the development will be taking place. Now, a gentle reminder that this orange area comprises about 0.76 hectares. So a very small area in comparison to the total site, which therefore means that about 16 hectares left over. The rest of that red area will be renaturalized, added to park space, and transferred to City of Toronto. Now, with any project, whenever they are building a development, there always has to be some sort of mitigation, offset, compensatory tactics to make up for whatever impacts you're making to the natural environment. So there is going to be some restoration taking place as a direct result of this development, but even more additional restoration will be taking place that Six Nations CAP team will be a part of those discussions as well, for that kind of like greater restoration property initiatives. Okay, so first off, I'm going to go through the arborist report. So within the entire study area, about 130 trees will be removed, and those will all be located within that kind of orange area. Now, they are following the City of Toronto replanting policies, which is a sliding scale. It's based on how big the tree is, how old the tree is, which means that within just the restoration of this development purely and not the additional restoration that will take place, 316 trees will be immediately replanted. Most of these trees being removed are actually invasive species. In order of significance, it goes Norway maple, sugar maple, and eastern white cedar, with Norway maple being an invasive species. And about 3 of those trees are actually being removed due to safety concerns. All of these trees will be planted on site, which makes sense. And as mentioned before, this is not the end of the restoration stuff, that there will be much, much more. All of the trees that are being replanted as a result of the development are going to be focused in an effort to create that 30-meter buffer around the Don River. So this is very important from a perspective of maintaining the health of the river itself. As what Dalen was mentioning before, when you have just mowed grass, basically anything that is on that land gets immediately transferred into the river. So any pesticide use, any herbicide use, anything like that that is being used on the grass immediately gets shunted into the river, which obviously can cause even worse bad impacts farther down the river. So by creating that buffer, that vegetative buffer, using trees and using shrubs and using natural native vegetation, you actually get a chance to capture that sediment, capture those contaminants before they can be transported downstream and cause even worse issues for even more things. So this is actually something that we usually push for when we do consultations with proponents within the Nanfan Treaty area. In total, again, just for the direct result of the development, it's about 6.5 hectares that will be immediately replanted with vegetation, trees, shrubs, so on and so forth. In addition, the proponent's also going to be adding some brush piles, deadfall, and stumps for additional wildlife habitat options. Okay, so the next report is the ESA report. This is a report that is mostly focused on looking at contamination. Being City of Toronto, there's obviously many sources of contamination that are present and possible within 1 kilometer. This can include gasoline, oils, PCBs. The pesticide use was determined to be correct. And so as a result of all these things, this site has been recommended to undergo a phase 2, which is where they would actually test the presence of these contaminants and for the severity and the amount. Now, historically, this site has pretty much always been a golf course, and it was constructed in 1969 originally. Okay, onto the hydrological report. So for the actual development itself, remember that little orange area, they are using a cut and fill method. It is on a hill. So it basically means that they are leveling off that development area by taking the soil up top and kind of moving it to the bottom and trying to level it out that way. Because of this, there will be some temporary dewatering during the construction process. Because they are building a stormwater management system that they can later be used for irrigation. It's part of the bylaws, again, for City of Toronto for low impact development, along with an underground parking lot. So there will be temporary dewatering for construction, but not permanently. They're also, as a part of the low impact development bylaws, doing some permeable pavements, bioswales, and adding a green roof as well. We did get some questions regarding the floodplain. So the floodplain does end before the development site of about 10 meters. So it's not anticipated to be impacted by any flooding. The river, of course, is a natural system. And so with high rain events, for example, the river would flood out up until that point and then come back down. It's a natural process. Okay, so for the natural heritage documentation, this is a document that tends to go into the natural environment specifically. So the species that were present, including birds, amphibians, bats, plants, mammals, etc. So I did pick out some highlights here, and I am going to try and respond to some of these questions that we received as well, and then we'll reiterate them. So for birds, they did complete some breeding bird surveys that were to code. The things of note would definitely be the eastern wood pewee, which is a small aerial insectivore. It's kind of on the, I don't know if Dalen, can you point to that kind of lower forest area? Yeah. So eastern wood pewee was observed in this location, which will not be directly impacted by the results of the development going in. In addition, there was also a nesting Cooper's hawk, which would have been in that top kind of like unicorn horn on the very north end, right by the road. Dalen, if you can go up there. Oh, a little to the right, yeah. A little to the right, north, yeah. So up and to the right, yeah, right there, perfect. So that's where the Cooper's hawk nest was observed. Again, not anticipated to remove any trees and do any removals there whatsoever. In addition, red-tailed hawk and foraging barn swallows were observed. However, they are very, very unlikely to be nesting on the site, just using it for food. For amphibians, no calling amphibians were observed during their surveys. They did see one American toad. For bats, they did do acoustic monitoring and detected big brown, hoary, and silver-haired bat, again in that southern woodlot where the eastern wood pewee was observed. Now, this is important for us because hoary and silver-haired bat are actually considered to be on the federal species at risk list. But again, they are in an area that we're not anticipating them to have that many impacts. For mammals, they did observe signs of muskrat, white-tailed deer, red fox, coyote, and cottontails. For this, it's very important to mention that they don't really do that many assessments for mammals in general. They just kind of look for signs. And so how they are using the golf course is kind of up in the air, just based on the general ecological function of how a golf course works in the natural environment. It is more likely than not that it is just a movement corridor. They're not going to be nesting on hole 3 or anything like that. For plants, they did do a full inventory, including ELC. So this entire area is mostly comprised of kind of more cultural habitats and manicured lawns. Again, not super ecologically valuable. There is some deciduous trees, including white birches, ashes, basswoods. One thing to note as well is that about 49% of the total number of plant species that they observed were non-native, exotics, or invasives. This is actually pretty common for golf courses in general. And I really want to hit home this idea that invasive species generally are not that helpful when it comes to the natural environment. Many invasive species actually outcompete our native wildlife and flora. preventing much more valuable plants from growing and thriving, and therefore not being able to provide sufficient food, sufficient shelter, or anything else for species of wildlife that are reliant on those plants. Some of these invasive species included garlic mustard, dog strangling vine, buckthorn, Dame's rocket, and of course that nori maple that I mentioned earlier. For the aquatic stuff, so within the Don River, they did do some investigations there as well. They did find that overall there is riffle pool runs, which is essentially good habitat where fish are known to spawn, to make use of. So that seemed pretty good, but again, it is still missing that buffer, which prevents contamination from coming in, which is what we're hoping to help create as a result of making this development going in. In terms of fish species detected, it was a lot of pollution tolerant generalist type species, think dace and white suckers. However, I did think it was important to note that historically speaking, pre-colonist, this site was actually a pretty popular spawning area for things like yellow perch, brown trout. And so it's especially important in the eyes of us and in the eyes of City of Toronto to try and bring this back to those historical conditions. All of the plantings that they are making are going to be of the native site appropriate variety, with a heavy impact on trying to increase that diversity that is currently found within the area. And another thing to note here is that this entire area is actually considered to be significant valley land due to the Don River, due to its large width and the catchment area. And as an extension, the southern woodlot is actually also considered to be significant woodland because it is so directly associated with that valley land. I mention this because this makes it a lot harder for this area to be developed into anything but a natural area in the future. And again, just wanted to reiterate real quick that we are going to be having more conversations around the restoration of the rest of the area. And you know, that is an additional opportunity for community members to be involved. So yeah, please let us know. I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to start answering some more general questions previously asked by community members. And then we'll turn over to our Wildlife and Stewardship Unit and then Archaeology to answer questions about those subjects. So the first question, if community members don't agree with the cultural center, how much would the payout be? If community members don't agree with the cultural center, there will be no payout. If community members agree to the cultural center for the 3-year period, but want it sold afterwards, the payout would be approximately $2.5 million. Now, the developers themselves, they claim it could be worth as much as $5 million, but we've gone with the more conservative figure that a real estate appraiser has gotten for us, which is $2.5 million. So again, we view that as, you know, very realistic, very obtainable amount to get for the unit if sold. Are the developers going to be selling the units or renting them? Depending on how much profit they make, will that be a consideration towards the payout? Or are they offering a fixed payout? No matter how much they profit, we get what we get. We understand the developer will be selling the units. The one exception may be the 5% of units designated affordable by the city. The payout is the same regardless of the amount of profit. Question, if they are so confident they will win this case, then why are they reaching out to Six Nations for our support? Answer, the developer first approached us over 2 years ago, well before the decision was made to bring this application to the Land Tribunal. Question, how will it be funded when the 36-month offer is up? Answer, when the 36 months are up, the council will decide what to do next. It will partly depend on what members say now, i.e. whether to keep or sell it, in conjunction with what opportunities may be available at the time. So for example, if the City of Toronto was willing to provide upkeep in staffing expenses, Like you, I expect most members will not support a cultural center financed by money that would otherwise be spent here. So as I say, number one, it's what the community has to say through this engagement process. And number two, the opportunities that may or may not exist in 3 years, which may make one option more feasible. Question: why reach out to us at all if they don't want to negotiate what is needed for Indigenous peoples? The answer: the developer may have reached out to help gain social license for his project rather than for reconciliation, though we believe the plan to renaturalize much of the golf course is very much an intrinsic good. Question: where would the money go if the unit is sold after the 3-year period? Answer: through default, money from a potential sale of the unit would go to Six Nations of the Grand River's general revenue, unless members during this process express a desire for the money to be spent elsewhere, specifically. For example, money to upgrade existing housing units here. Question: why can't the land be given back to Six Nations instead of being given to the City of Toronto? Answer: generally, the default for any undevelopable land the developer does not wish to keep goes back to the municipality they're in this case, the City of Toronto. After the decision at the Ontario Lands Tribunal, consultation with the City of Toronto will occur, and one of the items for discussion can be the ownership of the remaining part of the land. But in Toronto, it's an uphill battle. The city doesn't adequately consult. Developers usually don't consult, and when they do, it's generally with Mississaugas of the credit. People in Toronto often falsely believe Mississaugas are the only treaty holder, making it hard for us to get to the negotiating table. The federal, provincial, and municipal governments say it's only Mississauga treaty land. And in our experience, the Mississaugas are willing to support large projects like this one in exchange for signs and art celebrating their treaty and culture without financial benefit, which makes obtaining more substantive benefits difficult for us. Question: what is the $1 million payout mentioned? Answer: while the cultural center could be sold for approximately $2.5 million after 3 years, as mentioned, if the project gets approval and the buildings are constructed. The $1 million only comes into play if there are problems after approval. So for example, if the company had financing problems and didn't end up actually going forward with the building, or if there are long delays, it's 5 years later or something like that, and there still hasn't been any movement, then that $1 million payout would be considered. But again, because it's only $1 million, our preference is to avoid that $1 million payments, just because market value should secure a minimum of $2.5 million if sold. Question: is the remaining land being sold? Answer: no. The land will not be sold but transferred to the city. We could request the land back from Toronto with or without an agreement with the developer. But aside from Toronto's reluctance to do this, we've requested land back from them before without success. There's also the problem that the city sees the Mississaugas as the treaty holder, not Six Nations. Question: why not a different accommodation, such as First Nation units? Answer: we agree that 5 to 10 low-income units for the exclusive use of First Nation members would be a better benefit, and that the land being transferred to Six Nations would be an excellent benefit. But we don't have enough leverage. If the development had been on the Haldimand track, an accommodation with 5 to 10 units would definitely be feasible. But this is Nanfan. Question: can we sell the unit to anyone? Answer: yes. Six Nations of the Grand River could sell the unit to anyone. It would be a normal real estate transaction. If there was the decision to sell, it would be sold for however much someone is willing to pay for it. So in that respect, there's no guarantee, but as noted, we believe we could readily sell it for around $2.5 million. Question: if Six Nations of the Grand River opposes the agreement, will you go to the Lands Tribunal? Answer: if the community decided to oppose the agreement, we would not support Turcotte at the tribunal. But we'll remind you that 97% of developers are successful at the tribunal. As such, there's an excellent chance their appeal would succeed without our involvement. Question: why did Toronto object? Answer: the main issue behind the city's objections is zoning, but we believe the unofficial reason, demands from golf course users to keep the course open, is the most influential one, as zoning is usually changed to accommodate such projects. And certainly in many occasions, we have opposed requests for zoning without any success. The municipalities routinely do this. Question: is the development safe? If anything happens, is Six Nations of the Grand River liable? Answer: we believe it will be safe to build. Buildings are regularly approved on slopes, floodplains, and other areas with natural hazards. Six Nations of the Grand River would not be liable for any structural problems. Question: is the land under dispute? Answer: it is not part of the litigation for breach of fiduciary duty against Canada, Ontario, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. That litigation is solely about the area known as the Haldimand Treaty. Toronto is located on the 1701 Fort Albany-Nanfan Treaty. There have been court discussions ruling in favor of Nanfan being a treaty, though Ontario and Six Nations of the Grand River disagree about its boundaries. The Crown is currently refusing to recognize Fort Albany-Nanfan as a treaty. We don't see any legal obstacles to having an agreement with this company and have agreements with other companies which have projects on Nanfan. Question: there needs to be an agreement in place before a decision is made. Is there one? Answer: yes, there is a draft agreement that has been reviewed by legal that is subject to community engagement and elected council approval. The legal fees have been covered by Turcotte. Question: when did this start? Answer: in summer of 2022. It has been on the monthly CAP team activity reports that were on the open agenda of political liaison until political liaison became closed. Question: what costs are covered in the 36 months? Answer: HST, utilities, condominium fees, property taxes, and any other related expenses. It does not cover wages for staffing. Question: could we get these costs covered? Who would fund it after the 3 years? Answer: there is some possibility of getting those costs covered, most likely through an agreement with the City of Toronto or from the Ontario Lands Tribunal ruling. Grants could also be utilized. We have heard there is a desire for it to be self-financing. That would be a factor if the agreement is approved on whether the unit is kept after the 36 months, along with what members say now, i.e. sell or keep. Question: who decides if it's not feasible? Answer: elected council would take the recommendations from involved elected council departments and registered members of Six Nations of the Grand River. Question: who would manage the cultural center? Answer: it is envisioned to be a joint collaboration with tourism, education, lands and resources, and any other departments which wish to assist. Question: what is the Ontario Land Tribunal, or OLT? Answer: the OLT is a government-linked body which makes decisions on land use planning matters. Most of their cases are brought forward by developers who disagree with municipal rulings or procedures. And again, just to remind you about that recent study that found the OLT decides in favor of the developers 97% of the time. Question: any units for First Nations? Answer: not yet. As the project advances, the CAP team could lobby the city for some of the subsidized units to become dedicated First Nation housing? Question, does it have to be a cultural center? Answer, the draft agreement specifies it will be a cultural/information center for the 36 months the expenses are paid. After that, it can be whatever elected council wishes. Question, why only 2 parking spaces? Answer, those are the parking spaces reserved for Six Nations of the Grand River members at the Cultural Center. There will be a visitors parking and other typical parking areas. Question, who reached out first? Answer, the developer. Turcotte, as previously mentioned, initiated communication in 2022, and we began meeting in the summer of that year. Question, how was the money decided on? Answer, usually what the developer is willing to offer, unless there is some specific leverage. Unfortunately, treaty rights are not enough, or all developers would be offering accommodation. Question, is there affordable housing? Answer, 5% of all the units are being reserved for affordable housing. Each municipality has a slightly different definition of what affordable is. What affordable means in this situation has not been decided yet. Question, where is the line border that goes through Toronto? Answer, we're unsure of the exact question. For talking Toronto, it's in the North York area on the side closer to Scarborough. If the reference is to Nanfan, all of Toronto is Nanfan Treaty territory. How many square feet? Answer, the minimum is 3,500 square feet. That is a combination of office, washroom, open space, and kitchen. Question, why doesn't this project support community? Answer, the number of off-reserve Six Nations of the Grand River band members is growing each year because of a number of factors, including housing and employment. There is approximately 16,000 off-reserve members. The GTA, including Toronto, has one of the largest urban Indigenous population, and that includes Six Nation of the Grand River members. Question, who would be the occupants? Answer, it would be open to the general public. Question, who is fighting for Six Nation of the Grand River's land rights? Answer, there will be a posting for a vacant position on the consultation and accommodation process team in early 2025. So we're hoping as soon as January of next year, and we encourage people to apply. The next questions, series of questions will be answered by Wildlife and Stewardship.
Thank you. Okay, question. In this community, we respect trees. Why can't you? To be clear, we always push for avoidance measures over mitigation and offset. We actually also push for a 10-to-1 tree replacement ratio and more conservative buffers, including a whole environmental levy that is situated around having higher benchmarks than what is legislatively required. For all the reasons Peter went into, unfortunately, those were not possible in this scenario. In addition, Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve is home to the largest Carolinian forest in Canada. However, that forest is shrinking every year on the reserve due to removal of that forest. I would also like to reiterate that the majority of trees being removed in this scenario are non-native Norway maples, which comparatively speaking are not super ecologically valuable in comparison to their native counterparts. And they are following the Toronto bylaw, which results in about 316 trees being planted. In addition, even farther restoration will be taking place that far exceeds what we would generally even push for, even through our best management practices. So in our opinion, the benefit to this long-term protection, the improvements to the ecological function, the improvements to the resilience of this natural environment by increasing the diversity, for example, strongly outweighs the cost of that immediate tree removal. Completely fair that some may not agree. Question, will it flood? The development has a 10-meter buffer to where the edge of the floodplain is delineated, so it is not anticipated that development itself will flood. The river, however, is a natural system, and so with large rain events will flood up until this limit. Question, any traditional medicines? Most of the traditional medicines observed were situated in that significant woodland to the south and that kind of upper horn area, but some of those include wild leek, jewelweed, St. John's wort, ostrich fern, stagcrod sumac, river grape, and curly dock. I do want to reiterate that we do put out a species of importance list to the community every year, which we try and get feedback on. So that is the document that I am working off of to determine what is important to the Six Nations community and what is not. If there is any specific species that any community member is concerned about, please don't hesitate to reach out and I'll try and find those answers for you. Question, could fruit trees such as apple or apricot be planted? Answer, generally speaking, apple trees survive pretty well in most circumstances. However, if you plant it in the wrong place or the wrong location, things like walnut and the jugalone can result in the death of that tree. But like I said, it's not usually our preference. We tend to prioritize natural, native, site-appropriate species over cultural or cultivars. Question, why not leave it as a golf course? That is a green space. I feel like Dan and I both went into this quite a bit, but generally speaking, golf courses are not as ecologically valuable in comparison to a natural area. I feel like this is actually pretty intuitive. If you look on your mowed front lawn, you don't see that many animals. If you go hunting in a forest, you're going to see a lot more. That's for many reasons. It's for the lack of diversity in different plants that things like pollinators and wildlife can use. It's because of the pesticide use that is rampant within golf courses, the mowed grass, the high amount of invasive species that in some cases can actually reduce the survivability of a lot of native species that we might find important, and the general lack of habitat. Question, are any hawks using the property? As mentioned, there is a Cooper's hawk nest on the very northern tip horn area of that map that I mentioned. It is nesting on site, but again, no trees are anticipated to be removed at all in this area. And in addition, a red-tailed hawk was seen foraging. So that this should stop that activity. If anything, hopefully we can even increase what that red-tailed hawk is getting. What about wildlife? I'm a little bit unsure about the question here, but generally speaking, wildlife currently is using the area as a movement corridor. There was wildlife observed. Our hope in this project, in the restoration due to the development, and more importantly, that future restoration of the whole site will improve wildlife diversity, survivability, and fecundity in the area. And that's all the questions I have. I want to say we're moving on to archaeology, but don't quote me on it.
I could just add on to what Lauren's saying. You got to think of it too. Like, there's so many people that are using the golf course that also displaces wildlife, and a lot of golf courses will have measures in place to actually try to keep wildlife off the golf course so that the wildlife doesn't wreck the golf course. Like, for instance, like rodents, things like that. Like, they set out traps. Like, they don't want that on the golf course. So golf courses really, at the end of the day, are not good for the environment and or wildlife.
All right, Tanya, I think there's 5 previously asked questions for archaeology.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So I would really like if maybe Dalen can pull that map up, because that's going to be pretty important to just grab a context here. So as you can see with this map, there's 16.9 hectares of land that's a frontage where this development site is, that is what it's known from the archaeological study is. It's called a development site, which is the orange. That area is 0.7 hectares of land. And again, it's a small portion of the whole subject area. The subject area, all in the red, has not been archaeologically tested. I would have recommended that if any future development occurs, that all of that area to be tested. What else can I say? This site was cleared in a stage 1-2 with standard test pit survey. There was no archaeological findings at the time. There also wasn't any archaeological findings in the adjacent areas. But with that Don Valley, the Don River there, I would say that there is a high potential for that area for archaeological resources. I won't dive too deep into this, as this is my first engagement session with everyone and I miss the in-person. So we'll go right into the questions. Why not a stage 3? So that is a frequent question asked for archaeology. Generally, the ministry standards and guidelines, which holds the licensee responsible for archaeology in Ontario, you generally go in and do the standard stage 1 and 2 test pitting, and if nothing is found, then it doesn't proceed on to the stage 3. So it's a stage 1 to 4 process. Another question, was the land disturbed? Well, in my opinion and experience, all golf courses are disturbed. But with that being said, my request when we do have participation on site is we go deeper to find where that disturbance lies, especially on golf courses. Any monitoring during construction? I'm not really sure what this question is trying to entail, but we were not engaged in the stage 1 and 2 process of this project in the August of 2022, which, you know, is a bit concerning to me. But again, those standards and guidelines only state that Indigenous participation is at a stage 3. So nobody was, you know, not following any Ontario standard. That is just my request, that we participate throughout all stages. So if any future development is to take place, I would recommend that there is construction monitoring occurring. Another question, are we creating our own standards and guidelines? Well, yes and no, because yes, we would like to see our own Indigenous perspective within archaeology, but we also need to see that the standards and guidelines that are currently in Ontario, we need to have further conversation with them, who is the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, and they are the governing body over these licensees. So it's a long 5-year time period. I've been having conversation with them with no movement, no change on the standards and guidelines. But yeah, I think it would be a good idea. We have our own guidelines with our own perspectives, but how that far it goes, I'm not sure. Was archaeology comprehensive? Again, this company, Parslow's, followed the standards and guidelines. I probably, if we had participation on site, I definitely would have asked for more work. But you know, Parslow is an ethical company, so, you know, I'm gonna, you know, say that, you know, the work's probably to their potential. That's all the questions I had from archaeology.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanya. I'm seeing some of the questions through the chat. We're not getting the direct Facebook feed, but they're at least on my end. But some of them are being copied and pasted for me. And the first one relates to you, Tanya. You've already addressed it, but if you can just comment again, it's please have Six Nations archaeological monitors on site for both staging activities and construction.
Yes. And that is, you know, like we pulled that map up, and I pulled that map up for a reason, because we can see the development area is a very small sliver of a whole subject area. We need to have archaeological monitors there. We have that Don River there, which is, again, high potential. We need to dig deeper. We need to have a voice there with our monitor. So yes, I completely stress that.
All right, and you know, same person's a few comments. I'm going to deal with one of them, which is please have 5% low income or geared to income units reserved for Six Nation members. We can promise we will do everything we can to advocate for some of the units to be specifically for Six Nation members. Yeah, as mentioned, it's 5% of the total. I don't know if we could, I don't know how feasible it would be at the end of the day to have 100% of them for Six Nation members, but I definitely think that's possible, and the CAP team will fight to make that happen so some of the units can be specific to Six Nation members. I'm going to read out more of that person's comment, but just a heads up, Lauren, the remainder relate to wildlife. Please ensure all timing windows are strictly adhered to. This includes migratory birds, fish spawning, turtle nesting, replanting, etc. And FYI, you can either stop me and answer here and there, or try to answer them all at the end.
Yeah, I might as well just go question by question, I guess.
Okay.
So in terms of timing windows for spawning migratory birds, I'm actually really happy to the person put this. So this is actually a legislatively required thing. This is something that we also push for. So for those who don't know, there is certain more sensitive times for a lot of fish spawning, for turtle nesting, and for birds, the nesting periods. For example, for birds, we advocate that they do not touch the trees whatsoever. I believe it starts in like April and kind of ends August time, because that is when birds are nesting in the trees. So that will be strictly adhered to.
Right, next, sediment and erosion control during construction. Please follow TRC, that's I am assuming Toronto Region Conservation Authority. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Guidelines, as they are quite good, having been developed through the Sustainable Technologies Evaluation Program.
So I don't know if it's me that answers this one or not. But yeah, like TRCA is heavily involved in any developments when they are on a floodplain. I know for sure they are heavily involved in the further up restoration type stuff, as well as, the actual going through the process to even get permission to build in this area in the first place. I don't know if anybody else can add to that.
And the next little bit, it does go back to Enviro, but it's more Tanya related, but I believe she just answered that question. Basically, it's I would like monitors on site to ensure the proponent is actively ensuring that the controls in place are not failing. And I don't know if you want anything to add anything to that, Tanya?
No, I totally agree with that. I want to ensure that, the developers are adhering by, our standards with it comes with our cultural heritage assessments. Thank you.
And then the last two from this person, also back to Lauren. Sorry, just scrolling up to get my place. All right. Please ensure spawning windows for culturally important fish are not impacted.
Yep, so similar answer to before. It is legislatively required that impacts to fishery resources are not messed with, and they actually have standardized sensitive spawning windows, which the proponent has to avoid. Reiterating as well that, currently there's not really much in the Don River, but we are operating under the assumption and that there will be at some point, and, can't always assess everything to make sure that there is a presence of something. So we are operating under the assumption that they are there, and taking that into consideration. So thank you.
Right. Next component, please ensure location for condo development is well outside of the offsetting distance for bank stability, and also adhering to TRC buffer zones adjacent to riparian areas.
So similar question again. TRCA is involved. The buffer, I believe, is 30 meters for riparian areas, which is something that we come across frequently. We usually try and push for more, but yeah.
Right, and just the last question for you for this person, Lauren, is please have the windows retrofitted to be bird friendly to lower bird collisions.
I love that. Yeah, so City of Toronto actually has a bylaw. They are categorized as a bird-friendly city. So again, the developer is required actually to have bird-friendly measures. So this includes treatment to windows, including downcasted lighting as well. So it doesn't mess with migratory birds.
All right, on to the next. With Toronto already home to many urban Indigenous organizations such as Council Fire, NCCT, Native Child, ONWA, etc., and with my own experience having grown up in Toronto, I do not believe that having an additional cultural center will benefit Six Nations tourism in any way, especially due to the location of the development. Eglinton and the DVP isn't exactly tourist central. However, there is one thing that all of the cultural centers in Toronto are lacking, and that's access to land. With that being said, rather than the property going back to Toronto, please try to propose having it given to Six Nations and putting it through the ATR policy to create an urban reserve. It would be a wonderful opportunity to have an urban nature reserve that is owned and maintained by Six Nations in partnership with TRC. This would be a great outdoor tourism opportunity. So I'll just briefly respond to that. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Certainly, if the target is tourists, you're much closer downtown or by the waterfront. But if you look at the area, the settler population is exploding. There's tons and tons of high rises being built. So I think there's still be some benefits just for people in Toronto. And also there's just been a number of developments that Mississaugas have signed on to, and we hadn't, with various commemorations, information about history and culture throughout the city. So I think it would still have the benefit. As far as the urban reserve adding to the ATR process, I mean, I think the CAP team would strongly agree that that would be the best possible outcome. And we will definitely, I think, unless a team member objects, I think we would be willing to do what we can with the City of Toronto to make that happen. My caution is that it will be a bit of an uphill battle. I think we'd be willing to take it uphill, but as I say, I'd be a bit pessimistic, at the end of the day about that outcome. But yeah, that would definitely be the best use of the property, no doubt.
Like Peter, I've been in the chat and I read them, so I can just kind of answer them.
Oh, thanks.
Be a little bit easier. So, second part of that question, she's saying if transferring the property to Six Nations for the future ATR is not possible, she would like to see a co-managed opportunity between us and the city for those lands. And yeah, that is something that's on the table. Like I said, that's something we're advocating for, but we just don't have all the details of everything, how it's going to exactly iron out yet until it goes through the Ontario Land Tribunal process. So that is something we are advocating for. I just want to say that. Another question is, please have your team advocate for additional tree plantings to replace the trees that are being removed for the building's footprint. That is something that we always do. Like Lauren said, we have a 10-to-1 tree replacement ratio. I believe as of right now, they're taking down 134 or 132, and there's 310 to be replanted. But like I said, if this co-management thing ends up going through, we have the opportunity to plant even way more trees than that. So like I said, the little fine details like that aren't exactly ironed out yet. It's something that we have to wait for, but that is something that we always advocate for, is we have a 10-to-1 for replacement ratio. So we will be adhering to that. Another question is, please advocate to ensure the natural drainage conditions of the watershed are not altered. And please have stormwater management plans reviewed by a hydrologist. So I'm just going to tell you that just from the golf course and all the grading that's already happened at this golf course, that those natural drainages have already been altered. But if we are able to renaturalize this area, we can bring back those natural drainage patterns. And all documents, we are also subject to review, so we can also make sure that the stormwater management plan is suffice and isn't gonna degrade the environment.
Great.
And
I'll
then
just-
there also is, they have a lot more comments for accommodations, so they're just gonna stop there, but they're wondering if they should just send them straight to Lauren Jones. That's a thumbs up. I can I'll put Lauren's email in the chat just to make it easier for you.
I'll just briefly add, yeah, as Dalen said, co-management, is something we're already committed to. And again, we want, that real co-equal partnership, not just, soliciting Six Nations advice or assistance, real co-management.
And that's all from Facebook at the moment.
All right, we'll cool our heels for a few more minutes in case there's additional comments or questions.
I think that's it.
All right, well, just indulge me, one more minute just in case something else comes up. All right, still not seeing anything down?
Yeah, the only person that was commenting just said they're gonna send the comments just straight to Lauren, so I think that's probably it.
Okay, but thank you everyone who took time out of their day, potentially out of their lunch hour, to attend this engagement session. Your input was invaluable. Every comment, question you asked will also be passed on to elected council, so they'll know, exactly what was said during this engagement. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Are you able to offline us, Daryl?